Hi, you guys. It is grab bag time. I have some grab bag questions with my trusty bag here. So I'm going to give them a shake. And these are some chapter 4 questions. So I encourage you guys to continue to send in your questions. So with this week, if you look over at chapter 5, if you have any questions for chapter 5, send in your questions because they may up in a video. All right, so let's give it one last shake and let's see what questions we have for today. Let's see. Did West Africans participate in the transatlantic slave trade? So good question. So the answer to this question, a simple answer is yes. West Africans did participate in the transatlantic slave trade. However, the way that slavery is in America, the form of slavery we will have is much different than any form of slavery that had ever existed. Because remember, slavery has existed for most of human history. However, no other place has chattel slavery. No other place than America, than the Americas, really have chattel slavery. What makes it so different here. So it's not like West Africans were selling their own people. Sometimes these were prisoners of war. Other times they may have been captives. So they do participate in the slave trade, but it's not, the thought is like, see you later, won't ever see you again. You're about to go labor these things and I'm selling off my own people. A lot of the times, if they had been warring with a neighboring nation, capture some of these prisoners, it wouldn't be their own people, it would be those. But yes, West Africans do participate in the transatlantic slave trade. Next question. Slavery has existed for most of human history. Thank you, sir or ma'am, for answering that question or saying that. What makes American slavery different? I feel like I just answered that. So what makes American slavery different is that we have a plantation-based slavery. And so it's this idea, one, that you're working on this plantation. Two, enslaved people work for a lifetime. They work forever in perpetuity. So that is another thing that makes American slavery different. Also, another thing that makes American slavery different is that the status of the slave is inherited and is passed down from mother to child, like any other, like a mole or a birthmark. It's passed down from mother to child. So really, the status of slave is a birthmark almost for enslaved women. It's a birthmark because regardless of how your child looks, your child is going to be enslaved. Unless the owner says, oh, this child isn't going to be slaved, or isn't going to be a slave, but that just did not happen. So, okay. Are there any Middle Passage stories available? Yes, that's the next question. Yes. Any Middle Passage stories available? Yes, there's the story of Aluda Equiano, and it's available on the Smithsonian website. He is also known as Gustavus Vasa. So he wrote in his biography, if I'm not mistaken, he writes about his experience being an 11-year-old, being transported on a slave ship to Barbados, to be a slave in Barbados. So that is available. If you're in my class, it will be a part of module 4. So you'll be seeing that. You'll be able to read that. So don't worry. All right. I'll do a few more questions here. This question says, how did the slave trade impact West African society? Does it impact West African society? Yes, the slave trade will greatly impact West African society. So for one, you're selling a lot of men, so it will distort West African society in a way. Also, since they're getting, it's not like they are they're trading in people and they're not getting anything in return. No, a lot of the times they are trading for weapons and such. So in West African society, because of the trade, you'll start to see this rise of militarized states that will have large armies that are using European weapons. And so you'll see militarized states that are dominate their neighbors because they have European weapons that their neighbors perhaps do not have. So it will lead, yes, it will impact West African society, and it will lead to a distortion and a rise in militarized states. So I'm glad you asked that question. Thank you. Right? Don't have that many questions left, so the shaking will become less and less. Okay. You said South Carolina slave culture was different. How was it different? Why is this important to know? So we did go over this in the lecture. So yes, South Carolina slave culture is quite different. It's different in that, unlike in the Peak, because they have the task system, they complete their tasks and then they're able to have a level of independence and do their own thing. Also because cultivation was strenuous, it's backbreaking, it's dangerous because there are so many mosquitoes and mosquitoes spread disease. It makes them different because they're able to retain some culture their culture because language and their practice, because they're isolated from whites. So they're not forced to assimilate because they're not around white people as much. So that's it's one of the things I'll say that makes South Carolina so unique when studying the slave trade. I picked up 2. All right. I'm going to throw that back in and shake it up again. Okay. So now I just picked up 1. This is a good question. So, student B, I'll call you. Thank you so much for sending the question in. Student B writes, why Africans? Why did colonists use Africans as a labor force instead of Native Americans? That is a good question. I really appreciate your asking this question. So there are a few reasons. So we have to first, I'll bring out the map again because I'm a visual learner, so I assume that a great many of you guys are as well. So if you look at this map and you look at this hemisphere, which I'll try to bring present, when you look at Africa in relation to Europe, for example, it's in a closer proximity. Africa is not isolated. They had participated in a lot of trade, meaning they've had exposure to Europeans and the diseases and things that come with being exposed to and being a part of that society. When Europeans come to the New World, we call it the New World because there had not been exploration. There had not been colonization efforts in the New World. So we call it this. And a lot of Native Americans, Native Americans simply at this time do not have the immunity. And so by the time we get to plantation society, Native American culture and society has been devastated by disease. That would be one of the first things. Native American society is transformed and devastated by disease. Also, Native Americans are not outsiders, and it's a lot easier to enslave people who don't know the environment, who don't know the landscape in the area. Native Americans are also, remember, fighting against European encroachment. They're fighting against westward expansion. And so by the time we get to plantation slavery, it's hard to enslave someone who knows the area. Also, you just don't have the population numbers. You don't have the population totals. And by the time we get to the 1600s, there are already laws that are saying that Africans are the lowest caste and that they are enslavable. Another reason, as we said, with South Carolina, is that a lot of Africans have an affinity to some of these to disease, and so they're able to withstand the labor. They're able to take the sun. They are able to take mosquitoes. Being around Europeans is not making them terribly sick because they have the immune system for it. So Africans are able to withstand a lot of these things, making them, I would say, enslavable in a way that maybe Native Americans are not as enslavable, at least at this time, because of death, because of disease, because of war. There's been a lot of death and devastation. Hopefully that answers the question. We've kind of answered this question, and this is the last one in the lecture. So the last one says, why is syncretism important? What's the significance? So let's go back to the lecture. If you remember the lecture, and I talk about syncretism. Syncretism is like this melding of different schools of thought. And we use syncretism in this lecture talking about with religion, because a lot of Africans, instead of converting, they will put saint names on their old gods and things like that. And so we see a lot of syncretism in different African American religions, in a lot of Afro-Caribbean religions, Afro-Latino religions and practices and traditions. It's important because it really helps to tell the story of the people, that you come up with these things that really, syncretism, I'll say, it's important, it's significant because it's a story of survival. It's saying, given these circumstances, I'm still able to take these things and somehow make it my own. An example of syncretism is Candomblé, which is an Afro-Brazilian religion. You see both elements of Catholicism as well as remnants of West African religions. And I would say an example of syncretism is even in African American Christian churches, the idea of getting the Holy Ghost, of being able to be possessed by a spirit. We see that in West African traditions. We see a lot of call and response, the participation, the clapping, the dancing, all of that are holdovers from West African religion. And I would say syncretism is significant because it helps to tell the story of these people. It really gives different cultures their identities, so it's really important to study these things. It's really interesting because it's their survival story. It's how they were able to survive these very intense experiences that they went to. So that's all the questions I have for chapter 4. So you guys start getting those chapter 5 questions together. I love answering your questions. If you want me to say your name, you can put my name. Of course, will not say your last name. Even if you want or a fake name. If you always wanted your name to be Fantasia, but your mom did not name you Fantasia, I will call you Fantasia. I will say, like, this is from Fantasia. I'll do it. So ask your questions. There's no such thing as a stupid question. The only stupid thing is not asking the question to begin with. So always feel free to bring me your questions. There are absolutely no stupid questions. I love answering questions. So write them in, and I'll see you guys next week with chapter 5.